Alright, so our third video today, we're going to be just briefly covering faith, hope, and charity or love. It's one of my favorite Bible verses, 1 Corinthians 13:13. Three things remain: faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. You'll often see charity and love kind of interchangeably, because charity is generally, giving of yourself to someone else, whether it's money or time or resources. And when we do that, when we act in that unselfish way, we are showing love to other people. So you'll see them, kind of interchangeably. But we want to make sure that in everything we do, we're cultivating good habits, things that are true, honorable, just, pure, pleasing, commendable, worthy of praise. The knowledge that all of these good things in life come from God. So having these virtues, faith, hope, charity, or love, these are habits that can be practiced, and they help us to reach our full potential, and they are actually things that lead to enjoyment and relaxation, because we can trust ourselves, we can trust God that we will be inclined to do the right thing, the good thing, and not really have to kind of stress about it too much or think too hard about it. So there are things that we call the cardinal virtues. They're acquired by careful formation, practice, correction, and grace. And that is prudence, or taking careful measure of these situations and opportunities, and making sure that we are choosing the option all the time that leads to goodness and love, allows us to follow our morals, our insights, our creativity, our vocation, and really live those out. We round that off with, as we mentioned in the last video, justice or fairness, fortitude or courage, temperance, and moderation. And once we are able to successfully cultivate those, we are able to use them in tandem with our theological virtues of faith, which again is belief in God, and then that belief allows us to share in the church and to be demonstrated to the world. And faith gives us the other theological virtues of hope and love. So hope is an inner desire for God's kingdom. It is based on trust in the teachings of Christ, trust in the love of God. And it keeps us from feeling discouraged, from feeling lonely, and it really opens our heart to what is possible even in the darkest and most difficult of times. Again, just like we mentioned a few videos ago, the Beatitudes, sometimes life here on earth is not always super great, but the Beatitudes demonstrate, that there's hope for, people who are suffering here on earth. We can always hope, and we know that there are much better things that are to come, that are awaiting us. Hope is the same thing that sustained Christ during his trial, his crucifixion, and his death. He shared in that hope. He knew that God would never abandon him. And we need to share in his hope and faith that God will also never abandon us and bring us to everlasting life. And then through our faith and our hope, we can engage in charity or love, which is the greatest of all virtues. It is what is referred to as it's the fulfillment of all works, and it's the ultimate goal of our faith. It's to love God and to love our neighbors. This means that we even have to love our enemies. I'm sure we've heard that gospel reading quite a few times, where it says, you have to love your enemies, pray for them, pray for the people who persecute you. We have to love the poor, people who are materially poor, people who are poor in spirit. we need to love and be gracious to everybody. And when we actually do that, we find that that can bring us joy and peace and mercy. Because even if we are not being treated well by somebody, we can find joy and peace and contentment in knowing that we didn't let that throw us off our path. We still kept making the right choices. We still decided to treat that person with love, even if they weren't treating us that way. And we were showing them mercy. And when we do that, we know that God will show us mercy in return. And the spirit of love, the power of the Holy Spirit helps us to live in line with those cardinal and theological virtues. So the cardinal virtues of prudence and justice and temperance and fortitude. And then the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love or charity. The Holy Spirit gives us 7 gifts that make it easier for us to love others and to engage in those virtues. Those gifts are wisdom, understanding or insight, counsel or prudence, fortitude or courage, knowledge, prayerfulness, and awe in the face of God, which is also known as fear of the Lord. It is important for me to note that fear in the Bible does not mean fear like afraid of, like that something is bad. Fear of the Lord is just kind of knowing like God is the most powerful, most worthy of worship. God is the one true God, and I do not want to do anything that disappoints him. There's also fruits of the Holy Spirit. Those are charity or love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, generosity, gentleness, faithfulness, modesty, self-control, and chastity. 9 of those were mentioned by St. Paul specifically. We also, in the Catholic Church, added 3. The 3 that we added, which are modesty, generosity, and chastity. It's because those were kind of included in the tradition of the church. So those are things that St. Paul did not say by name in his particular list of the fruits of the Holy Spirit, but modesty, chastity, and generosity were things that were talked about often in the same vein along with the other named fruits of the Spirit. So when St. Paul talked in plenty of other parts of his letters about what is good and what's not, these things kept popping up with other named fruits of the Spirit, and so tradition in the Catholic Church has kind of said, well, these are important to include also. Another thing that we need to be careful of is that some people look at the gifts of the Holy Spirit and they say, well, wisdom, knowledge, counsel, all kind of the same thing, but they're not. So wisdom is not the same thing as knowledge. Knowledge is like facts. So knowing the facts of the situation, knowing certain things that help you to make a decision. But wisdom is something deeper than that. Wisdom is something that allows us to say, I need more information. Wisdom is something that allows us to say, I don't really know what I'm doing with this. I need to go and get an outside opinion. Wisdom is saying, okay, I need to step back from this situation and I need to do a little more digging first. So wisdom is kind of like the initial, like having your antennas up, like, all right, like I need to look at this more carefully. And then if we're able to do that, we can seek out knowledge that will help us to make a decision. And then counsel or prudence is that actual decision-making process where we're using the knowledge that we gained from wisdom to make a good decision. And then understanding and insight is kind of like knowing why that is, knowing what's right and wrong, understanding why certain things are more favorable to do than others. So there's a lot of different levels to the decision making process. And the reason that there's so many gifts of the Holy Spirit that are kind of related to that decision making process is because that is the difference between us exercising our free will for good and us exercising our free will for evil. So that really kind of is the one thing that makes a difference in how we live our lives.